standard of care for glioblastoma is responsible for the overall poor survival and death of these patients. Absolutely. I'll stand by that because I have the scientific evidence to support that. They're all the same disease. Brain cancer is not this different from breast, colon. They all have the same problem with mitochondria. They're all dependent on glucose and glutamine. It's not 100 diseases. It's one singular disease of energy, of dysregulated energy production. Now, how complicated is that? The future is this. What I just told you is the future. And we're going to, maybe not me, but others will perfect it to the point where cancer will not be considered a fearful disease. But we have people will start getting healthy when you're killing their cancer cells, not making them worse. Hair fallout. What are you talking about?
My name is Astha Symes, and welcome to Live Longer World. Professor Seyfried, welcome to Live Longer World.
Oh, it's nice to be here. Thank you.
So I think your research is remarkable because it's turning the cancer paradigm on its head. And it's been, over 50 years since President Nixon declared the war on cancer. We've been spending billions of dollars to try and cure this disease. And yet, as you've pointed out in your research, we have something like 1,700 people a day dying from cancer in the United States alone. Your work, I think, speaks to why this might be happening. So can you speak to what's wrong with the current cancer paradigm?
Well, thank you. It's the current cancer paradigm is based on cancer being a genetic disease. And if you go to the National Cancer Institute website, it says cancer is a genetic disease comprising over 100 different types of disorders, all driven by different kinds of genetic mutations. The new data, if you look carefully at the data, it does not support this information from the National Cancer Institute. As a matter of fact, to accept cancer being a genetic disease, one would have to be either cognitively challenged or a hopeless ideologue, because the evidence clearly shows that we have some cancers that have no mutations. We have driver mutations in normal tissues. And driver mutations were thought to be those that really led to the dysregulated cell growth, like P53 and some of these others. And now we find these P53 mutations in normal tissues of people that never have dysregulated growth. And the nuclear transfer experiments, which have been repeated in many different types of cancers under different experimental paradigms, where the nucleus of the tumor cell is put into a normal cytoplasm, and you don't get dysregulated growth, where if the normal nucleus is put into a tumor cytoplasm, you get dysregulated growth. This information overwhelmingly says cancer cannot be a genetic disease. And what Warburg had first done and what I've pushed over what he had done shows that cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disease, not a genetic disease. And this is the reason why we're not making any progress. You have to realize there's two things here. Number one, we've put billions of dollars into the Cancer Genome Atlas and thinking cancer is a genetic disease, and it hasn't had any major impact on reducing deaths. Consequently, because that has not come to fruition, we continue to poison and irradiate people, because the idea was that if cancer were a genetic disease and we were able to target the genetic mutations, we could get rid of the poisons and radiation. But because cancer is not a genetic disease, we can now have to continue with poisons and radiation and all the other things that are being done, like immunotherapies are based on cancer being a genetic disease. Some people do well on immunotherapies, but you can just as well die from the therapy as being cured from it. And a lot of people don't even respond to it. So clearly it's not moving the needle. And you're right, each year we get more and more dead people, and we're not making any progress. I don't care what anybody says. 1,700 people a day dying in the United States, 70 an hour, and continues to increase year after year. It means that we have made zero progress. So when you drop the death rate by 30%, then you know you're starting on the right path. But we're not doing that. So, I mean, people can I look at it as a monumental failure. And it's a failure because the theory of what the disease is incorrect. And when you have an incorrect theory, you're not going to move the needle.
So this old theory, which I suppose is still the paradigm, is the somatic mutation theory of cancer, which is that cancer is a genetic disease. I'm curious, where does it even come from in the first place?
Well, it comes from a number of different places. It came from the fact that in the 1950s, when Watson and Crick were awarded the Nobel Prize for the structure of DNA, um, and people had always, it actually starts with Theodore Boveri in 1914 when he speculated that there was some abnormalities in the nucleus of cancer cells based on studies in sea urchins, which doesn't make any sense to me. And one of his friends, I think his name was Hammerschlag, told Boveri, Theodore Boveri, that this is all nonsense. As a matter of fact, Boveri wrote a big article on this and was very apologetic about cancer being a genetic disease. He said, I have no clue about what cancer is. I don't know anything about it. Everything is pure speculation, and I could be completely wrong. Yet he was anointed as the father of the somatic mutation theory. So, but he himself said, I don't know anything about cancer. And then others came along and started to cancer damage to the nuclear genome was always seen in not always, but recognized, often recognized in cancer cells. But it wasn't until the early 50s when Watson and Crick found the structure of DNA, and then you found structural abnormalities in the nucleus of cancer cells, structural DNA abnormalities, and everybody was, gene think, genes control everything, and you have mutations in genes, and that's going to lead to dysregulated cell growth. And the more and more scientists jumped onto these oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes and all these kinds of things, but failing to recognize that the gene mutations themselves are arising from the damage to the oxidative phosphorylation. So the genes are not the cause, they're the effects. And once you realize that, then it's such an embarrassment and tragedy to realize that by re, the resistance to change and the attachment to this incorrect theory has led to all these poor folks being killed by not only the disease but the treatments. I don't know. I think half the people that are treated for cancer die from the treatments. I mean, it's horrific. You don't poison and irradiate people to make them healthy, right? This is what they do. Surgically mutilate them, remove breasts and colons and lungs. I mean, this is the way we're treating cancer patients. As I said in my other interview, it's medieval. Nothing could be more medieval than the current cancer paradigm of treating people.
So, one point you're saying is that, first of all, not all cancers even have mutations. And then, secondly, even the nuclear mutations that do happen are a downstream effect of something that's wrong with the mitochondria and the respiration going wrong in the mitochondria. So, it's not the mutation, in other words, is not the primary cause of cancer. It's a downstream effect, if at all, it happens in a cancer cell.
That's right. That's right. And when the oxidative phosphorylation, the ability of the cell to generate energy through oxygen, when that becomes compromised, these cancer cells produce reactive oxygen species, ROS, and they are carcinogenic and mutagenic. So the mutations and damage we see in the nucleus come from, in large part, the ROS. So there's a clear link between damaged respiration and the mutation. So we've been chasing tail. We've been chasing downstream effects. And when you chase downstream effects, the outcome is 1,700 people a day dying. And it's not getting any better.
Now, how do we know that the primary cause of cancer is damage to the mitochondria and respiration?
Well, we know that because mitochondria control the differentiated state of the cell. Mitochondria can determine, they control the cell cycle through calcium signaling changes that our mitochondria does this based on the proton motive gradient in the mitochondria. So when cells need to divide, they don't divide out of control. Mitochondria maintains division under control or maintains the quiescent state of the cell. When that organelle loses control over the energy metabolism of the cell falls back on fermentation metabolism, which is energy without oxygen. This is the kind of energy that existed on the Earth before oxygen came into the atmosphere 2.5 billion years ago. All the cells at that time were dysregulated in their growth and driven by a fermentation metabolism. So the cancer cell is doing nothing more than falling back on these ancient pathways leading to a dysregulated cell growth because the mitochondria that's supposed to control this process loses control of this due to a number of different insults that could damage the efficiency of oxidative phosphorylation. So there's a two-step process. One is a gradual, slow interruption with oxidative phosphorylation, maybe from intermittent hypoxia, systemic inflammation, some viruses, some chemical carcinogens. Any one of these provocative agents can lead to a gradual disruption of oxidative phosphorylation, leading to a gradual increase in what we call substrate level phosphorylation or energy production without oxygen. So substrate level phosphorylation can produce energy without oxygen. So the cell and the default state of mammalian cells is proliferation, and the control of proliferation is directed by the mitochondria. So if the mitochondria gradually become dysfunctional energetically and the cell falls back on its energy default state, which is proliferation, then the cell is in a dysregulated state. So the mitochondria control the destiny, the differentiated state of the cell. And then you get all the secondary mutations, a lot of other secondary. They control the apoptotic signaling. What does that mean? Programmed cell death. So when our cells are injured, the mitochondria release cytochrome C, leading to a cascade and program cell death. In other words, the cell is programmed to die because it has damage or something along these lines. Mitochondria control that. They control the kill switch of the cell. And when the mitochondria become defective, the kill switch is broken. So the cell bypasses the normal programmed cell death mechanism, continues to proliferate out of control, driven by a fermentation metabolism. If people understand evolutionary biology and general biology, and what I'm saying makes perfect sense because it's all supported by scientific literature. But when you are indoctrinated to think cancer is a genetic disease, you don't think about any of the stuff that I just spoke about. And therefore, you have this perpetuation of dead people. So until this, what I just said, is understood and recognized more clearly, then we're not going to make any changes.
That's super helpful. So, one of the things you said is that because the mitochondria is defective in cancer cells, that's also one of the reasons cancer cells are not able to die themselves. Versus normal healthy cells, if they get damaged, you have this apoptosis process.
Yeah, and that's one of the things in the hallmarks of cancer. It's the failure to recognize apoptosis. So different and dysregulated cell growth that comes from the fact that the cells are fermenting. So all of these things, you can go through all the hallmarks of cancer and link all of the hallmarks clearly back to mitochondrial dysfunction.
Is mitochondrial dysfunction something you see in all types of cancer? Are there certain cancers where you don't see this?
I did a deep dive on this whole thing, spent a lot of time. You have to go back in the scientific literature and look at electron microscopy because the electron microscope wasn't perfected until the 1950s, 60s. People, started looking at the ultrastructure of cells because on light microscopy, you really can't see much. A mitochondria are thread-like organelles that exist in the cytoplasm. But in order to really look at them carefully and in detail, you need electron microscopy. So when you go back and look at a lot of these guys that were looking at the ultrastructure of tumor cells were just pointing out what they saw. There was a lot of cellular abnormalities, but a lot of the mitochondria were abnormal in structure. They had sometimes no cristae, the inner membrane elaboration of the organelle. Sometimes there were few mitochondria. Sometimes the cytoplasm was packed with abnormal looking mitochondria. There's all kinds of morphological abnormalities. And then, of course, when cell biology started to isolate mitochondria in pure form from tumor cells, it was clear that there was all kinds of functional abnormalities in these organelles. And we here at Boston College, we studied cardiolipin, which is a very specialized kind of lipid in the inner membrane of the mitochondria that plays a very significant role in the efficiency of the electron transport chain, which is ultimately the efficiency of oxidative phosphorylation. And we found massive changes in number and structure of the cardiolipin, meaning that this lipid, which controls the efficiency of mitochondria, was always abnormal. In fact, no one has found a tumor cell yet with a normal structure and function of either mitochondria or cardiolipin. So this clearly tells us that these mitochondria are not functionally effective. They're insufficient in their ability to produce energy through respiration. Therefore, the cell falls back on a fermentation mechanism, which is energy without oxygen and a dysregulated growth. It's not that complicated if you understand the biology of the situation.
Do you also see a change in the proton motive force of the mitochondria?
Yeah, sometimes you do. Sometimes it becomes excessively steep, and other times it's dissipated. There's uncoupling proteins. The oxygen that enters the mitochondria, what we and others have found, is not linked to ATP synthesis. So our big discovery that Warburg did not know about, nor does most of the people in the cancer field, they don't know that there's two ways for a cell to get energy through substrate level phosphorylation. One is in the glycolytic pathway, the Embden-Meyerhoff-Parnes pathway, which is the cytoplasmic pathway that produces energy and the payoff phase of glycolysis. And many cancer cells dump lactic acid into the microenvironment, which is where pyruvate, instead of going into the mitochondria and being respired, is reduced to lactate, which then accumulates in the microenvironment, leading to acidification. Tumor acidification is common in many kinds of cancers. Warburg knew only about that. Our discovery was that there is a substrate level phosphorylation process inside the mitochondria itself. So this is an organelle that can both respire and ferment under different kinds of conditions. And no one knew about that. That's our big discovery. A paper just came out recently, late December 2024, where we're getting tremendous recognition on this study. For the first time, people are realizing that these mitochondria can ferment glutamine. That glutamine amino acid can be metabolized through the mitochondria to succinic acid, which also contributes to extracellular acidification. So now, here, why everybody said Warburg was wrong? Why so many people thought Warburg was wrong? Because Warburg himself thought that oxygen consumption in the cancer mitochondria was also linked to oxidative phosphorylation. And his critics said, well, how can Warburg be right saying that oxidative phosphorylation is the origin of cancer when cancers are taking in oxygen sometimes as high as normal tissue? And this created a tremendous amount of controversy because yes, the cancer mitochondria does take in oxygen, but it's not contributing significantly to oxidative phosphorylation. They are producing ATP through the mitochondria, but through a fermentation mechanism. This is the big new thing. The new thing is the cancer mitochondria can ferment and they dump out succinic acid. So now we put the parts together from Warburg. Warburg was right. Cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disease. He just didn't have all of the details together like we have today. Now it becomes irrefutable. Cancer is a mitochondrial metabolic disease driven by fermentation metabolism because oxidative phosphorylation is inefficient. So we know this, and therefore the cell proliferates out of control because the organelle that's supposed to control this is not working. And now with the knowledge that this is a fermentation problem, and that the two fuels driving the dysregulated growth of the sugar glucose and the amino acid glutamine. And we know because that mitochondria is defective, they can't use fatty acids or ketones. Now we have a solution to the problem, right? Transition the whole body over to ketones. The tumor cells can't use them. They store them in the cytoplasm. And then you target simultaneously together, the two fermentable fuels. And these cancer cells are checkmated. So they can't use anything else. And how do we know that? We tested all this stuff. We interrogated these cells and to see what they can use and can't use. They can only use glucose and glutamine. Yes, they can use a little bit of other things, but the term is logistics. In order to replace the high energy efficiency of oxidative phosphorylation, you better make sure that the alternative fuels are present in the microenvironment in large quantities to run the dysregulated growth. And some of these other amino acids are not there, only glutamine. So clearly, we know what's going on. It's just that, unfortunately, the world doesn't know it or refuses to accept it. And therefore, we got 1,700 people a day. It's a tragedy because we can stop it. We can significantly reduce it with what I told you. But the clinical trials, we have to have people that are knowledgeable. So we have to train people to understand what I just said, understand how and we just put this big paper in, a big protocol paper for glioblastoma that goes through a lot of what I said by my colleague, Dr. Thomas Duryea, next door here, works with me. And we have 25 other nutritionists, dietitians, scientists, MDs, physicians, all kinds on this paper. Once they realize that this will be the strategy for managing cancer, we can adapt it for all the cancers. They're all the same disease. Brain cancer is not different from breast, colon. They all have the same problem with mitochondria. They're all dependent on glucose and glutamine. It's not 100 diseases. It's one singular disease of energy, of dysregulated energy production. Now, how complicated is that?
Now, that's such an important point that I want to stress on because I think everyone, like we've discussed, thinks that every type of cancer is different. And even within breast cancer, you have different types of cancers because of the different mutations that are happening. But what you're saying is that that's absolutely false. In fact, cancer, all types of cancer is one disease, and it stems from the fact that there's dysfunction to the mitochondria. And I just want to try to summarize some of the key points you mentioned, which is that despite the presence of oxygen, cancer cells are fermenting. What that means is that because they're fermenting, now they're using up two fuels, which you've shown through a lot of your work, glucose and glutamine. And they can't use fatty acids. So if we can cut off the glucose and glutamine, that is one potential way we can start dealing with cancer. And all of this entails understanding the fact that cancer is a metabolic disease and it's not a genetic disease.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much what it is. Now we're the tip of the spear on this whole thing, and it has to be perfected. It has to be dosage, timing, and scheduling are the ways to perfect this. And this is what we call non-sexy science. This is mostly trial and error. So people don't like science. Oh wow, you got some innovative. We got 1,700 people a day dying that we can significantly reduce, but it's not sexy science. It's trial and error on how to target glucose and glutamine without harming the rest of the body. And you can do lower glucose with diet, but you can't do that with glutamine. So you have to use drugs. And what are these drugs? Well, they're glutamine targeting drugs. They block the ability of glutamine to be metabolized. And if you don't know how to do that the right way with the right dosage, you could not make it work as effectively as it should be. So we have to hold the noose on glucose, which people can do that. That's why we developed the glucose ketone index calculator to allow people to know that you can bring your blood sugar down and elevate your ketones and get into this nice low zone. And then you come in and you target the glutamine while you have the patient in a low GKI. And that requires some skill because targeting glutamine, you have to be very delicate. It keeps our gut healthy and it keeps our immune system healthy. A urea cycle. So glutamine is an extremely important molecule. If you don't know how to manage it, then you could potentially not have this therapeutic strategy work as successful as it should be. And I don't know, they all say, what do I have to eat for Craig? Well, I don't know what they're all based on this. Bring your GKI down, and then we come in with drugs to target glutamine. It has nothing to do with glutamine in the diet. Zero to do with glutamine in the diet. So it has to do with targeting glutamine with drugs, and you have to do that strategically. Otherwise, it won't work as well. So people say, well, oh yeah, don't eat carbohydrates. Bring your sugar. Do water only fasting. Um, it's easier to get into these zones on carnivore than it is on vegan. So you have to be chewing plants all day long like some herbivore. But you got to be careful because you got to get your GKI down. You can do it if you eat plants, but it's just harder. I don't know. People can do whatever they want to do. Want to stay alive, they better understand what I'm talking about. Because a lot of the treatment falls on the shoulders of the patient. So the patient has to be knowledgeable and compliant with the knowledge. Otherwise, it doesn't work. People tell me, "Oh, I can't do this." I'm like, "Okay, go get radiated and poisoned. See how that works."
Now, when you say glutamine has to be targeted strategically, does that mean you can't cut off all glutamine? Or I guess it's probably not even possible to.
Yeah, it's the most abundant amino acid in the body. It's very high, and it's needed for our immune system. So if you go in and shut down glutamine completely, you damage your gut and you prevent your immune system from picking up the dead tumor cells. Who's going to pick up the dead cells, right? So you go in and you slaughter a population of cells, and you got them laying around. It's like a battlefield. You want to let them all rot there, you bury them, right? So you have, and that's done by our immune system, and they need glutamine. So the glutamine that the cancer cell needs is the same glutamine that the immune cell needs. And as we've shown, all these metastatic cancers are derived from our immune system, especially macrophages. So we know what the metastatic cancer is, regardless of whether it's a liver, a colon, a breast, a brain. All these metastatic cancer, all these metastatic are compromised macrophages, also dependent on glutamine. So my adversary needs glutamine, and my therapeutic cells need glutamine. So you can't go in there. Okay, you can kill cancer cells, but you prevent your immune system from picking up the corpses. So you have to be strategic. So what we found is that if we hit them with glutamine for a day, what happens? The tumor cells get hammered and die, but the immune system doesn't die; it just gets paralyzed. It can't. So you pull off the glutamine, let the immune system now recover, picking up the dead cancer cells. So again, it's you degrade, slowly degrade, while your body is getting healthier and healthier and healthier, burning ketones and fatty acids, your normal cells. But the tumor cells are restricted. They can't use these tremendously powerful, effective alternative fuels, fatty acids and ketone bodies. So we know the biology of what we can do. Um, the future is this. What I just told you is the future, and we're going to, maybe not me, but others will perfect it to the point where cancer will not be considered a fearful disease. But we have people will start getting healthy when you're killing their cancer cells, not making them worse. Hair fall. What are you talking about? Anytime you've seen these cancer people, they're always bald, right? That's be, that we're treated by somebody who has no clue about the biology of cancer. You should never be bald. Why are you bald? The cancer cells don't exist in your hair follicles. It's the adverse off-target effects of the poisons that they're giving people, radiation and poison. Your hair goes. Why are you doing that? The damn cells can't live without glucose and glutamine. It can't transition to ketones and fatty acids. Now you know how to kill them and manage the disease, and you don't have to lose your hair. So, or the bleeding gums and diarrhea, fatigue, nausea, vomiting, all this kind of crazy stuff. You don't have to have that. But yet, go down to talk to your oncologist, go to the top medical schools. What I said to you, they have never heard of it. I have no clue. Most of them.
Now, one other thing that is probably part of your press pulse protocol, which is what you call it, which is restricting glucose and glutamine, is hyperbaric oxygen therapy, I think. How is that connected?
Well, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, as Dominic, he's an expert on that, the Agostino. We published together, and it turns out that um, putting a patient in pressured oxygen dissolves oxygen. You have to realize our erythrocytes carry oxygen, and they could be 100% saturated with oxygen, but the oxygen is not dissolved in the plasma. That happens when you put the patient in high pressure with oxygen. And if you have a tumor cells with bad mitochondria or inefficient, corrupted mitochondria, and you put force oxygen onto them, they produce more reactive oxygen species, ROS, and that kills them. And and the interesting thing is that what protects them from ROS damage? Listen and listen carefully. What protects the cancer cell from ROS damage um, is the glucose and glutamine, because the glucose carbons are part of the pentose pathway, and the glutamine produces glutamate, which is part of the glutathione mechanism, the two antioxidant systems. So when I'm putting a patient in restricted glucose and glutamine and putting them in hyperbaric oxygen, I am making those tumor cells extremely vulnerable to oxidative damage. It's almost like radiation without the toxic effects, because radiation kills tumor cells by creating reactive oxygen species, ROS. But why would you do radiation? It harms your normal cells when you can do this with regular. So we can take patients, put them in a low glucose ketone index, and then put them in oxygen pressure, and that can also help kill tumor cells without toxicity.
I see. Okay. Um, so you mentioned you had this December 2024 study, which was a culmination of a lot of the work you're doing. But I think you've been talking about glucose and glutamine for a while now. So what was new about this research that just got published?
Well, as I said, if you ask anybody about the glutamine issue in the metabolism field, they're going to say, "Oh yeah, everybody knows about glutamine. The tumor cells are glutamine addicted." But what I said to you is that they think glutamine is respired, part of the respiration, and a plerotic means the replenishment of carbons to the TCA cycle. Uh, our discovery was no, it's producing energy through mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation, a different mechanism from oxidative phosphorylation. So people people are know that glutamine is important for cancer, but they didn't know the mechanism. We're showing you that it's a fermentation mechanism. It's another aerobic fermentation mechanism that's producing energy through a different strategy. So you have to simultaneously target glutamine and glucose together to get therapeutic benefit. Because if you target glutamine alone, the cells will survive on glucose. And if you target glucose alone, the cells will survive on glutamine. So you got to get them both together at the same time while the patient is in nutritional ketosis. And then you put a much greater chance of eliminating the tumor. And even if you don't eliminate it, they become very indolent. They're not angry. There's a lot less inflammation and a lot less angiogenesis and all these other aspects of an angry tumor, inflamed. We reduce a lot of that. So we have some cancer patients that um, were considered terminal, but they're not cured, but they're living with it. So everybody wants cure, cure, cure. I'm not. Listen, get it managed, man. Manage the damn thing, so your quality of life and overall survival can be improved. Whether you're cured or not, who knows? But the bottom line is you're living longer with a higher quality of life. What's wrong with that? Right? Nothing wrong with that. So that's what we're working on. We're not working on a cure. We're working on effective management. And if you get a cure, good, that's great. But if not, then you still can be living longer with a higher quality of life.
Do you think metabolic therapy can be done at any stage of cancer?
Well, certainly earlier stages would work much, much better. Um, some people email me from hospice, and they've got like 2 days left, and I'm not sure whether their bodies can sustain the stress, metabolic stress. In our preclinical, we're actually testing that right now. We take mice and we give them tumors, and we let the tumors grow really big and angry, um, where the mice start to suffer, just like a human would be suffering. And then we try to come in with our metabolic therapy. And it's actually astonishing. Some of these mice that might have only had a couple of days to live really start to recover better. So I don't know at what stage it becomes no longer effective, but we're testing that. That's what we do. you see so many papers in the scientific literature where they put a few cells under the skin of the mouse, and like 24 hours later, they start a very aggressive treatment. And then you all of a sudden see, wow, look how effective this is. Let that tumor grow really, really big and angry and metastatic, and then try your therapy and see if you can pull the mouse out of it. That's what we do, because if we're successful in doing that, man, we'll have tremendous success in the clinic, knowing how to do that. So we stack the deck against us. We want the hardiest, strongest tumors, and we want to see if metabolic therapy can work against the most aggressive and angry tumors. Now, of course, in the human clinics, they have these stage zero cancers. A lot of them are called stage zeros. And they do, some women getting mastectomies and radiation on stage zeros. Are you kidding me? Yeah, metabolic therapy will take care of those things real quick. I don't know what you're doing. Why are you just taking these beautiful women and cutting their breasts off, certainly mutilate? I mean, it makes no sense to me at all. I don't know what these people are doing. Don't they read the scientific literature? Don't they understand what we're talking about here? It's just sad. It's really a tragedy.
But do you think there's something to be said when it's stage zero and extremely local and small and it can just come out via surgery? Then maybe that's an easier, better protocol to just remove it altogether when it's so small?
Well, I think that's what we expect to do too. We're not arguing against, and as a matter of fact, what we're finding, if you do metabolic therapy, it has two things. Number one, it gets smaller and can be plucked out really easy with a surgical procedure, or it disappears altogether. So why you want to take someone's breast off if you can't find anything that you were looking at, right? Prophylactic? Are you kidding me? I mean, unless some women don't like their breasts and just want them removed. I don't know what the logic is behind this, but any event, yeah. So the idea is that yes, we can and the other thing too, we're not against all standards of care. What we're finding is that sometimes chemotherapy in very small dosages has so much more therapeutic efficacy when the patient is in nutritional ketosis. So we don't throw out all the tools of the toolbox. Even radiation, if it's a hard to get tumor with surgery, and radiation could do it better, you would shrink the tumor down using metabolic therapy and then come in and incinerate it with a beam of radiation and making minimal damage to surrounding tissues. So again, it's going to have to be a complete reevaluation of the kinds of tools and procedures that we're using to get a more successful outcome in managing the disease and keeping people alive. It's all possible. It's just that I don't know what it is. The field just oncology seems to be, I don't know, they're kind of strange. They can't seem to accept anything than what other than what they do and what they were trained to do. But, I don't know how long it's going to take for them to come to know. I mean, I just don't know.
I think it's the information is spreading at least to the patients directly. I hear a lot of people recognizing this themselves that going into ketosis and like you said, it's a little more nuanced than that. It's both glucose and glutamine. I think people themselves are waking up to this, which is certainly extremely
Well,
good.
they're waking up a little bit, but I get so many people. What should I eat to reduce glutamine? Wrong. You can't do anything. You got to use drugs, 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 drugs. And one of the drugs we use is the embendazole, fenbendazole, parasite medications, and they target the same pathways that the tumor cells use. So that's why they work, but they work much better in therapeutic ketosis. Everything works better when you're in therapeutic ketosis. So don't tell me anything until you're in therapeutic ketosis. Then once you're in there, then you have a lot of options. You can go to your oncologist and tell him just use one third, and then he says, "Oh, I can't do that. The system tells me no, it doesn't." You got to tell these guys. See, when I go to the doctor, I usually tell him exactly what I need to have done. When you ask him to figure out what you have, you could be a bit might not. Make sure you know what you have before you go to these guys and say, just do this for me, okay? Um, but yeah, the oncologists, they're trained to do what they do, and unfortunately, they're all of them, or the majority of them, are not trained appropriately. They think cancer is a genetic disease, and they just treat you with very toxic poisons and radiation and this kind of stuff. And I think their success would be much better if they knew cancer was a mitochondrial metabolic disease, and then they would use their radiation, chemo, and other procedures. Even immunotherapies could potentially work better. So everything will work better when you're in nutritional ketosis. Your body is stronger, the tumor is weaker, and whatever you're throwing at it's going to work better. So all of these things come together.
Speaking of drugs that block glutamine, another one you've mentioned is Dawn, which I think you said is not available for some reason. Why is that the case?
I don't know. It should be. It should be the number one drug. They said it was too toxic. And then when we looked up the toxicity, it wasn't anything near like Red Devil, carboplatin, and these other things. Are you kidding me? It's nothing has nothing like those. Um, it's a repurposed drugs. It wasn't as effective. It was working pretty good against leukemia in kids. Don't forget they used it on children and they used it on, but they said, oh, it's a little toxic and it doesn't work well. Yeah, you didn't choke the glucose. You didn't get the glucose. The problem is if they don't, they when you think cancer is a genetic disease, I don't know. It's like something happens to your brain. It be, be, you can't think. You can't use rational thinking anymore. But it'll change. It has to change because people want to live. I think people want to live. They don't want to die, you know. So they have to come to know this, and the people will make the decisions once they see the outcome. We're publishing individual case reports, we're publishing preclinical studies. I'm seeing more and more. We're getting a registry now of all these stage 4 terminal cancer patients that outlive their prognosis. So we're collecting more and more data. At some point, there's going to be a tipping point when the population says, "I want metabolic therapy." I want metabolic therapy. If you can't give it to me, I'm going to find somebody who can. So these guys better get on board or get out of the way because it's coming.
Yeah, one thing I do love about your work is the fact that you're not just presenting theory and some evidence, but you actually talk about real life examples and cases of people who have solved or at least managed their cancer by following the metabolic therapy protocol.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's why I said it's not perfected yet, but what we're seeing tells us there's great hope. Whenever you have anything new, it's has to all the different follow-ups to this will make the whole situation better. It is based on the science. The science tells us this is a mitochondrial metabolic disease, and we have defined the fuels driving the dysregulated growth. So now it becomes important to perfect this. How are we going to target those two fuels together and keep the body super healthy while you're targeting this? And this is going to be the new field. This is the new form of medicine. And not only that, it works. It like we saw for some of the cancer patients. Um, Not only does their cancer become more manageable, but they've also got rid of their diabetes and their high blood pressure and their hypertension. This all goes away along with the cancer. So clearly, it has implications for just overall general health. Because when you take people today, you've seen it so many times. A person says, "Oh, I just came back from I had a little pain, a little blood, or a little something." And now they tell me I have a stage 4 cancer. And the guy looks pretty healthy. Then as soon as he undergoes treatment, I mean, he looks like some skeleton, beat up, horrible looking. He's sick. He's miserable. This shouldn't have to happen. This is nuts. So, but yet I feel so bad for the cancer patients. They hear what I say, they get all fired up and excited, and then they go to the oncologist and says, "Oh no, sugar and diet have nothing to do with it. Glucose and glutamine, no, nothing." And then they get angry and throw you out of the office. Now, how do you think that makes the patient feel? The oncologist should be thrown out of the office and have somebody in there has a few functional brain cells, about what's going on. So I feel bad for the oncologists too. They just haven't been trained. I think they really are good meaning people. They just locked into a failed system, and it's also very profitable. So the status quo is profitable for all these different industries. But if people want to live, you're going to have to change the status quo. It's going to have to change.
One thing you mentioned is that you're not against all standard of care. Obviously, chemotherapy could work in low doses if you are in therapeutic ketosis. And I think Istanbul, Turkey, some places there might be trying this model. Do you know what the results are of this combination therapy per
Well, it
se?
works. Yeah, it works really well for some people. And nothing works well for everybody. Let's be honest. I mean, if standards of care are killing 50% of the people that are being treated, that ain't working really well either. Metabolic therapy can work well. Is it always guaranteed to work well when you try to reduce and manipulate these things? Not always, because the same issues we have, compliance of the patient, knowledge of the patient. You see, the difference between standards of care today and metabolic therapy is that the patient has to be knowledgeable and very understanding of what's being done, because a lot of the success falls on the shoulders of the patient. In the current standard of the care, the patient is a bystander. They just sit there and get treated. They're not really participating actively in the management of their disease. They have a scheduled radiation, they have a scheduled chemo, and they just take the radiation and take the chemo, but they're not doing any. And then they say, eat whatever you want. Make sure you get a lot of high carbohydrate foods to make your strength back. I mean, this is insane. This is lack of knowledge of the on the grand scale, a complete misunderstanding of what the nature of the disease is, and a failure to understand biology. So this is the problem for the poor patient. I mean, I visited really top-notch oncology centers, and I see in the room, I see a guy, and a lot of these oncology, they're clean, white, smiling faces, and on one side, and then people being infused and poisoned on the other side. I mean, you see a guy being infused with chemotherapy while he has a big Coca-Cola and a hamburger in front of him. I mean, it's nuts. It's nuts. So what are you going to do about that? You have to educate people and let them know this is crazy. You don't do stupid stuff like that, you know? But anyway, they do it. And it's being done all the time as we speak right now. And as when we finish, 70 people will be dead from cancer. Can you believe this? 70 people an hour are dying from cancer in this country. And it's a horrific death for the most part, not a pleasant death. And it's sad. And it shouldn't have to be this way.
Yeah, that's absolutely crazy. I mean, even if you didn't have the knowledge on glucose and glutamine, it's probably not how you should be fueling your body with Coke when you're undergoing such
Yeah,
treatment.
look at it. They tell Infamil, they go, all these, many cancer patients are told, eat whatever you want. Glucose has nothing to do with cancer. Get your fat, get your sugar up. This is nuts. I mean, these guys, don't they know anything? Don't they read the scientific literature? Don't they understand the biology? This is the scary thing. It's scary to know that someone who's treating you has less knowledge of the disease than the patient, or the patient, both the blind leading the blind on this whole thing. And I know I hate to say this stuff. I mean, it makes me, but geez, I look at the science and I know what I'm talking about. And I feel like when I see this, I'm saying, oh my God, this is so tragic, tragic on every level.
I'm guessing the National Cancer Institute is aware of your research and work. What's their take on it?
They ignore it. I mean, I don't know what's going on with those guys. I mean, I've told them. I said, "What's going on? Who's the guys writing these uh, web pages? Don't they know what they're doing, or they're being told by some?" I don't. I think that they follow the so-called leaders in the field, and the leaders in the field think cancer is a genetic disease. So when the leaders have no clue, then the NIH, the National Cancer Institute, has no clue. And yeah, I mean, why would they choose to refute? Oh, it hasn't been repeated. Well, one of the correct things, why don't you guys repeat it and see what's going on? The new NIH director wants a lot of the science to be repeated, because half the stuff coming out of the cancer field can't be repeated anyway. And the tragedy is a lot of the basic research is done by thinking cancer is a genetic disease, and a lot of that can't even be repeated. So that's another. It's called broken science. Broken science, you can't repeat what the other guy did, and consequently, there's no advance. And when you constantly keep saying cancer's a gene, let's target that gene, let's look at the expression profile, let's look at this and look at that. Listen, we can look at that later. Let's drop the death rate now, which we can do. Once we keep the death rate down, 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 you can study all this other stuff. But why are we wasting our time on things that aren't working when we have an opportunity to reduce the death rate? Let's get the people let's get this disease under control, and then we can worry about minutia. Right now, we're putting all our energy into minutia while all these poor people are suffering and dying. So we got everything backwards on this whole cancer thing.
Yeah, so to your point on people not understanding this, you were on Peter Attia's podcast a few years ago, and then last year, Peter Attia was on Andrew Huberman's podcast talking about how cancer is a genetic disease, which I thought was interesting, for lack of a better
Yeah,
word, given
yeah.
that you were one of his guests. And then BBC also put out this video recently saying, when you were on the Diary of CEO podcast, that, oh, there's health misinformation spreading. So I'm trying to understand, are there legitimate questions coming from, say, smart people like Peter Attia on why they're not accepting this new theory of that the fact that cancer is a metabolic disease?
It's called confirmation bias, okay, which means that you go along with the crowd. Ideological, dogmatic ideological dogma. Um, Peter may not doesn't want to rock the boat. You got to be bold. You can't worry about the dogma. You can't worry about people are dying here. If these guys knew what the hell they were talking about, you'd be able to drop this death rate, and they don't. Okay, that's what gets me upset. Yeah, these guys are smart. They're supposed to be smart, but maybe they're not smart. Okay, because a smart guy would say this doesn't make this the whole cancer thing doesn't make any sense based on the new science. Oh, it has to be repeated. Well, it has been repeated over and over again. You just choose don't read, just don't want to read the literature. So yeah, I don't know what it's going to take. Yeah, BBC. Oh, you misinformation. These guys have they don't do this research. They're not doing the research. I'm doing the research. I'm the one interrogating these tumor cells. I'm the one looking at all this stuff. Our lab and other labs are doing this. Okay, these guys are just angry about stuff. I don't know. Why? I think I don't really care what they think. All I know is we're right. We're right on. And once they know that, then you go, oh man, we knew this all along. Yeah, right. Tell me about it. You know, we're the ones doing a lot of the research to show this. And we're seeing what other people have seen, but we're interpreting differently. And we because we understand evolutionary biology. These guys have no clue about evolutionary biology. It's when there's a veneer here. You got to remove the veneer and you really find out that what's really happening. Yes, we are correct. There's no question about it. We are the tip of the spear. You want to make difference in cancer? You better listen to what we're saying. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere.
I had Charlie Lineweaver on the podcast. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work.
I know, Charlie.
Yeah, he also approached it from the whole evolutionary theory of cancer perspective. He doesn't, I think he still goes with the view that cancer is genetic disease, but it's not random mutations. But he has this whole evolutionary perspective, which I also thought to your point, most people don't bring that perspective onto cancer research.
Yeah, well, you have to know evolutionary biology because the cells that existed before oxygen were all dysregulated in their cell growth, all driven by a fermentation metabolism. It wasn't until metazoans when you had the fusion between one bacteria with another that you're able to produce energy through utilization of oxygen, which led to metazoans, multicellular organisms. I mean, if we didn't have that fusion, we'd all be single cells. We'd all still be in our single cell state. But yeah, I mean, there are disagreements. I've looked at this. I have a whole chapter in my book on nothing in cancer biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And yeah, you spend a lot of time. I do this 24/7. I'm thinking about this stuff while I'm sleeping at night. I think about this stuff all day long. My army of my undergraduates, graduates, and professional scientists think about this all the time. Where are we making a mistake? What are we missing in our understanding of cancer? And we think about it. Does somebody have a new piece of information that comes along suggesting that we may not be correct? We have not yet found that. And I'm looking for that. I want somebody to tell me where I'm making my mistake. And so far, they just disappear somewhere. I don't know. So please, you tell me, what's wrong with this picture? What am I telling you that's wrong with all the stuff that I just told you?
It makes sense to me. I don't know. I mean, I clearly obviously don't think about this 24/7,
I
so I'm
do.
not the right person. I
Yeah,
know.
well, no, you must. You must think about this all the time now, and find out. You find some guy who says I'm wrong, and we'll look at his criticisms, and we'll take it under advisement, and then figure out. Maybe he'll make an important improvement in what we're doing. So we'll just have to see. But right now, I have not seen where we have been made in an error on this whole thing.
That's a great point. I haven't seen anyone directly criticizing why your research is wrong in terms of actually giving explanations, which is why it just strikes me as bizarre that it's so hard for people to accept. But if I find someone, I mean, that would be a great conversation to have,
Well,
honestly, someone who has legitimate explanations.
yeah, well, it's like, for example, you got Dana-Farber, MD Anderson, Sloan Kettering, the Moffitt Cancer Center, the Fred Hutch. You got all these top, and when you walk into these places, you can't help but be impressed. You got all these guys with white jackets and ties, and they look very, very formal, and they talk a talk. They talk physician speak, making you feel good, and then they poison and irradiate you. I mean, there's something wrong with this picture. Right? So, and then before you know it, oh, I'm feeling really good, blah, blah. And then the cancer comes back, and we're going to get more and more. And the cancer comes back, cancer comes back. And the next thing you know, you're finished. You're looking for the burial plots. You got to get on top of this when you first get that metabolic therapy going. Oh, we can do so many things with this. If we all work together with a common goal, we would be able to manage this cancer pretty effectively.
Let's talk about glioblastoma, which is one of the most deadly types of cancer, brain cancer. You said you recently did finished a study on it, a research study on it. What was that talking about?
Well, that was a treatment protocol that we put together based on our knowledge of the biology and the biochemistry. And my colleague, Dr. Thomas Duryea, first author on the paper, he's an MD, PhD, and he will eventually be the director of these clinical trials. But we had to get the science straight first. And then there's a lot of options. We got to bring the glucose and glutamine down, but then what? How do you do it? And Thomas put a tremendous amount of energy into this, and several other distinguished people who work in nutrition and in the areas, clinics and things. They came on as co-authors. So it's just how do we go? And the other problem, of course, right now is you're not allowed to do that. We wrote a protocol that's not permitted according to standard of care. So now we have a problem. We have this beautiful way to treat brain cancer, glioblastoma. And that same strategy can be just tweaked slightly for all the major cancers because it's still a singular disease. What happens in a glioblastoma happens in a liver, colon, breast. They're all fermenting. They're all throwing out glucose and glutamine. It's just in a different organ and a different tissue. So, but it's basically the same metabolic problem, very similar metabolic problem. We also found out that when you're in nutritional ketosis, you can deliver drugs through the blood-brain barrier much faster, easier. So you don't. We've seen so much to make this stuff better, but they're locked into this radiation standard of care first. So what they do, they don't allow what we're saying to be done. They say, well, we'll let you do recurrent glioma. What does that mean? Oh, we'll give the patient radiation and chemo, temozolomide, steroids, and then when it doesn't work, which almost all the time it doesn't work, then maybe we'll consider doing metabolic therapy. No, 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 no. Get the metabolic therapy on there first and then maybe if that doesn't work, we'll do a little radiation. You know what I'm saying? Shrink the tumor down, have the neurosurgeon debulk it, and then go back with metabolic therapy. And if we need radiation or a little bit of temozolomide down the road, we'll do that. Completely turning around the standard of care for glioblastoma. But when we spoke to these brain cancer oncology centers, it's almost like I blasphemed telling them that we want to do it a different way. It was almost so affront. And I said to these guys, well, your patients are dying. Don't you guys have any realization that you've been doing the same thing for 100 years and making zero progress? And now you want to be resistant to anything that might work? You tell me where the logic of this is going. But they've been so comfortable in doing what they do, they think, oh, if we don't do what we do, the patient will die sooner. Well, what the hell? We're not doing nothing. We're transforming the whole thing to make it better, not doing nothing. You're up against, I don't know what it is, calcification of rational thinking. And it's just the most amazing thing I've seen. But I go back, listen, you go back in history of science and you see very, very similar kinds of things. The geocentric, heliocentric view of the solar system, where the Earth was considered immovable and the sun and all the planets revolved around the Earth. And when Copernicus said maybe we should put the sun in the center and have the Earth just be another planet like the others revolving, um, in his Revolution Obus paper that book that he published, and then followed by Kepler with the ellipticals, and then Galileo with the telescope to look at this, and he was house arrested for things that he said to the Pope. And don't forget, the Catholic Church finally recognized um, the heliocentric model in the 1800s sometime. So I mean, people adapt very slowly. When it challenges your very thinking about things in a very profound way, people don't just readily go, "Wow, this is the greatest thing I've heard. Let's do that." No, no, no. They're going to resist it tooth and nail until it becomes so overwhelmingly obvious that they have to accept it for looking like buffoons. Eventually it'll happen because people and cancer, if you thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system, and the sun goes around the Earth on a daily basis, okay, maybe, but not that doesn't lead to 1,700 people a day dying. Your view on that. But when you consider cancer as a genetic disease, that's responsible for 1,700 people a day dying. So people better get their act together and start thinking about this. Otherwise, in fact, why should I worry about it? I know what to do if I got cancer. What the hell should I worry about whatever everybody else is doing? So it's just sad. It's sad. I maybe I shouldn't say anything. Maybe I should just retire, go down to Florida, relax, lay on the beach, get a nice sit under a grass hut with a Mai Tai. Why should I worry about all this stuff?
No, I think your work is remarkable. One thing actually that was really shocking to me is that you say that radiation itself is fueling the two fuels that you don't want for cancer, which is it's fueling the glucose and glutamine. So it's not that it's not making things better, it might be making things worse.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, we published that paper in Lancet Oncology in 2010 because I'm a neurochemist. Okay, so I study epilepsy, I study the brain, neural circuitry, and all this kind of stuff. And we have a glutamine glutamate cycle put out. Some of my colleagues, Dr. Mary McKenna and others that have really done a lot of work on this area. We have very tightly linked the glutamine and the glutamate cycle. What happens is, and when we send out a signal in our neuron, we release a small chemical called glutamate. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter, and it excites NMDA receptors so that you and I can speak and we can think because of the neurochemical activities that are happening in our brain and our eyes and other areas of the nervous system. But as soon as that glutamate is released, it has to be impact the receptor quick, but then it has to be removed very quickly. Otherwise, we get excitotoxicity, which means the glutamate stays and excites the neuron until it's dead. The neurons die. So we have a very elaborate system where the glial cells take up the glutamate right after it's released, and right after it stimulates the receptor, it has to be removed. And the glutamate is then taken back up into the glial cell and converts this to glutamine. And then the glutamine is taken up by the neuron and remetabolized to glutamate. So glutamate to glutamine back to glutamate. And it's a very tightly regulated system in order to keep our brain function. So you come in there with somebody with a glioblastoma, and then you cut out this tumor and irradiate the air, you're breaking apart all of the glutamine glutamate cycle. You're freeing up massive amounts of glucose. And when you irradiate somebody, the blood sugar goes up, the brain swells, and then you give high dose steroids to reduce the inflammation, which makes you have hyperglycemia in the blood, and the glutamate killing the neurons frees up all this glutamate, which is an excitotoxic a molecule, creating a tremendous amount of glutamine in the microenvironment. And you put all that together, and you get survival anywhere from 8 to 15 months. And it's been done that way for 100 years. And you wonder why very few people survive, because you're creating an environment that makes the tumor recur rapidly. And it's not a mystery. What you're doing to these poor patients is sealing their death sentence right away by doing that. So you got to stop doing this crazy stuff. Otherwise, you're not going to get any advance. And yet they don't want to change. They don't want to change. So my God, what are they doing? It's just tragic on every level.
Do you think the standard of care might be worse for glioblastoma compared to other types of cancer, or is it
The
equally all bad?
current standard of care for glioblastoma is responsible for the overall poor survival and death of these patients. Absolutely. I'll stand by that because I have the scientific evidence to support that. So it's just the people that you do this, they've never heard of it. So, I mean, what's going on here? They're trained to use radiation so smoke doesn't come out of somebody's ear. They're not trained to know the biology of this. The surgeons know how to take this out. And my neurosurgeon friends say, yeah, so we shrink that down. If we can shrink that tumor down and make the borders more sharp, the probability of debulking a greater amount of the tumor will be significantly increased by metabolic therapy, which is known to already give people a much longer survival. The more the tumor is debulked, that means taken out, the longer the survival is. Problem with glioblastoma, the edges are very, very fuzzy, and you got a lot of the tumor cells already invaded into the normal part of the brain, and you don't see them. So when the surgeon says, "Oh, we got most of it, but not all of it," you're dead. You got there. You got to get it all. How am I going to get it all? Shrink it down and then debulk the whole thing. And so if you have a watchful waiting period of 2 weeks sometimes before you debulk it, not always, sometimes you have to take it out. I know this stuff. You have to take it out, otherwise it could get hemorrhage and patient could die in one day. But if you have any watchful waiting period, then you shrink the damn thing down, let the neurosurgeon take it out, and then come back with metabolic therapy. It's a planned strategy that will almost guarantee much greater survival. But they don't do that. So I don't know what to say.
In glioblastoma, can you shrink it all the way down just with metabolic therapy, or do you think debulking in that case probably
Yeah,
makes sense?
yeah, I don't think you can shrink. I think with glucose and glutamine targeting, you might be able to get it down to the point where a surgeon can cure it by taking it all out. But we're not doing that. We're not doing that at all. So we're only doing the metabolic therapy after you created this inflamed microenvironment, leading to the tumor cells seeding throughout your brain, and then they come back. So, everything we're doing is just not, I think we can do those things, but I just think we have to do them in a different order.
Have you done any studies on trying metabolic therapy for other neurodegenerative diseases?
Well, for sure, for epilepsy. I mean, we've been doing that for little kids for decades. That's how I got all this knowledge about ketones, and I work with some people, and I
And
do.
is that restricting glutamine as well, or is that only
No, actually, just the
glucose?
ketogenic diet. Yeah, and we're not really sure how that's working completely at all. All we know is that it's a balance between ketones and glucose. We had little kids that were completely managed with ketogenic metabolic therapy, and then they would take a muffin or a drink and explode right back into a seizure, breakthrough seizures really quick. Even though you spent months trying to manage this kid, all of a sudden he goes to a birthday party and gets some cupcake, and it's boom, he get a breakthrough seizure. So very fast. Whereas cancer, you don't have that. Um, if you were had it managed and you go out and drink a muffin or eat something sweet, yes, you will cause a number of the cells to get a little bit more aggressive, but you don't see it, you don't feel it like you would an epileptic seizure. It's obvious to everybody there. Something just exploded. There's no mystery here. So and we can manage. Sometimes the epileptic seizures they don't come back. They're resolved in some kids. And adults, I don't know. It works for them. Then we had, guys doing modified Atkins diets and different kinds of formations of ketogenic, make it a little bit less rigorous than sometimes. There's a lot of exploration. And that should be the same kind of thing we do in the pediatric oncology. This is another tragic. All these little kids brutalized by a system. They should be the pediatric epilepsy pediatric oncology guys should be arm in arm in working together on this. And yet the Great Wall of China separates these two. Play in the same medical school. one side they're doing radiating and poisoning kids, and the other side they're using this a very similar therapy to a metabolic therapy to manage seizures, and they don't cross talk, which is like nuts itself. So, pediatric oncology, we should be able to make a big. In fact, we have a paper under review right now using a ketogenic metabolic therapy for managing pediatric brain tumors. We have all this stuff. We're working on it as hard as we can because we know this will be the future also. But I don't know how long it's going to take for these guys to come to their senses. Um, I don't know. It just takes time, I guess.
What about Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? Do you think that's worth exploring as well through metabolic therapy?
Yeah, I think so. Because I published a paper on Parkinson's disease. It's another kind of a mitochondrial problem. The problem with Parkinson's disease, when the mitochondria become sick, the neurons die, and in the substantia nigra part of the brain, and you get movement disorders and these things. So you're not causing the neurons to. And the other thing too, cancer doesn't happen in neurons; it happens in glial cells. Neurons cannot tolerate fermentation energy for very long. So when you have sick mitochondria in a neuron, the neuron usually up and dies. It doesn't transform into a dysregulated regulated growth. But there's a lot of reactive oxygen species and inflammation in the neurons of Parkinson's disease. So I think that ketogenic metabolic therapy could be perfected in a slightly different way. You won't need to target glutamine, as far as I know. Maybe you do. I haven't thought about that enough on that. As far as Alzheimer's disease is concerned, it's absolutely can be reduced by ketogenic metabolic therapy. Our brains are becoming distorted. One of the things that's interesting in Alzheimer's disease, they are starved for sugar. They they seem to, and that's one thing you don't often get. There's a People who have Alzheimer's have less cancer than the regular folks because they're being starved of glucose. You can't drive dysregulated growth without the glucose, and it's really amazing. But yes, probably about 40 to 50% of Alzheimer's diseases could be prevented. Don't forget our Paleolithic ancestors. Well, maybe they didn't live long enough to get Alzheimer's disease. They died from injuries and infections. But people who live according to their traditional ways, they don't seem to have cancer, type 2 diabetes, or Alzheimer's disease at the same rate that you would see in people living the great American diet and lifestyle. Our greatest our greatest gift to the world, the great American diet and lifestyle, guaranteed to give you type 2 diabetes, cancer, dementia, and all these other things that we like to distribute.
So if someone wanted to prevent cancer, it sounds like going back to the Paleolithic diet is obviously going to be helpful. Do you
Well,
think?
it's Paleolithic diet and Paleolithic lifestyle, which is a lot of exercise. Okay. You're doing a lot of exercise. You know how hard it is to track down and kill a big animal? I mean, using spears and rocks and things like this, not using a high-powered weapon. Do you know how hard it is to hack up a big elephant or a big water buffalo and eat it? I mean, the exercise. I mean, you're exhausted just trying to get the meat off this thing. And we're sitting in traffic. We're all freaked out, we're watching our computers and cell phones, sitting on the couch looking at the cell phone, watching the TV, eating some highly processed carbohydrate. And where did this tumor come from? Oh, how come I can't think straight anymore? Yeah, it's our diet. It's the whole thing. Prevention of cancer and all these, but people don't want to do that. They love the highly processed carbs. They like to sit, they don't like sitting in traffic, but they have angry about things, poor sleep, all these things all come together and bathed in forever chemicals and plastics. You put all that crap together and you get all these health problems associated with it.
Yeah, so sometimes you hear of young, healthy, fit individuals, super fit people who eat clean and look great, end up having cancer, people in their 20s and 30s. What do you think is going on there?
Well, it's diet, lifestyle, and chemicals in the environment. They eat health. We don't know what they're eating. I don't know. Just keep it. They might think they're eating healthy, and they're not. Right. I mean, I'm a fit guy. Okay, the morbidly obese guy, he might say, well, I know what he's got. He's got a problem. He's got diabetes, systemic inflammation. He's got all these kinds of things. As a matter of fact, diabetes is replacing smoking as a major health risk factor. But the guy that does, I do exercise all the time. I did this, I did that. Yeah, but maybe you have emotional freak out. I don't know. You might have other things in your system that's all I know is when those guys get cancer, they're fermenters. The cancers are fermenters. They're using glucose and glutamine. No matter where it comes from, no matter who it is, what age, they're that. So then we have to go into management section rather than prevention. You can't. It's very hard to get cancer if your mitochondria remain healthy. That's what because it's a mitochondrial metabolic disease. So if you keep your mitochondria healthy, the probability of cancer is extremely low.
So someone's listening to this and wants to try the metabolic therapy because they have cancer or know a loved one who does. Are there certain resources you direct them to follow the
Well,
protocol?
Yeah, well, a lot of our papers are all open access, the majority of them. Um, they're pretty heavy into the science, but the paper that we just published, Dr. Durye's paper, is kind of a protocol. If you can follow that, then, and it's detailed. There's a lot of supplements people can take that can, maybe push it in the right direction a little bit, facilitate the action of glucose and glutamine. So that paper is open access too, and Biomed Central Medicine, BMC Medicine, big journal, which is very detailed. Thomas put a huge amount of work into this, all the detailed things. But again, people can read it, look at it. Our Press Pulse paper is the conceptual. That's the framework upon which Thomas's paper was based. It's open access, so anybody can. And they just, problem is they keep bombarding me with all these questions that are all answered in the papers. They don't read the papers, and then they ask me all these things that are already answered in the papers. So I want somebody to read the papers carefully, and then if it's not clear, I'll be happy to answer a question. But please read the papers before bombarding me with all the things that are already put out in the paper. You know.
I'll link to the latest one as well, so hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, and people have to realize that our research is supported predominantly by private foundations and philanthropy, and that keeps us going. And there are people, when people donate money to me through the university or through Travis Christofferson's foundation, we acknowledge them in the scientific papers that we publish. So, there are people out there that says, I want to be part of the movement. I want to know that I participated. And what I do is I acknowledge them in the back. Look at the papers that we publish, and you'll see the acknowledgement section. And you say, who are all these people? Well, those are the people that are giving us the money to do the research that we're doing. And people say, whoa, I feel really good about that. And they go ahead and give us money. And then when we publish the paper, we acknowledge them. You'll see these names. So that's how we move forward. We're keeping, as long as people continue to support our research, we're not going anywhere. We're still pushing forward. We'll push and push and push until the funds dry up. And hopefully they don't dry up.
And how can someone listening to this support your research?
Well, as I said, Travis Christofferson's Foundation of Cancer Metabolic Therapies, it's a 503 foundation. They make donations to his foundation. And then through Boston College, I have on the biology department, there's a place, a little button to say donate. And you go through a few steps and people make donations directly to me through the university. So those are our two primary sources. And then we have some small foundations, of course, that are interested in like a breast cancer or colon cancer. And we support preclinical research. The preclinical research is then the foundation upon which we do the clinical work. So my friends that do clinical work will start adapting our findings from the preclinical studies into the clinic. We're one of the few groups that really does have bench to bedside. We fire this stuff out really fast into the clinics that are able to do and modify some of these things.
Lastly, what are some of the open questions that you are currently exploring in your research?
Well, right now, we have shown in glioblastoma in preclinical with a human cell line and two mouse cell lines that mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation is a major driver of this. We like to establish that for all the major cancers. We want to see if there's any cancer that we can find that doesn't follow this common pathophysiological problem. That would be an eye opener for us, because then we would have to modify that. But it takes a lot of time to work these things out. Yeah. So, and the other thing we're working on in vivo, which is in the preclinical, what are the really unique drug diet combos that would work the best? In other words, get the greatest amount of therapeutic benefit with the minimal or absence of any toxicity. So again, this is the new world. The new world is drug diet combinations, diet drug combinations that work synergistically together. So the drugs work better under a particular dietary setup, and that's what we're working on too. So again, all of this stuff is the beginning, but it will all be perfected in the end. Super efficiency in the metabolic centers, and this is the future. It's just that it's so new and not recognized by the majority of people, but it's coming.
I'm looking forward to that. So thank you for all the work you're doing. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention before we close?
No, I think we covered a lot of the bases here. I mean, we talk in my lab. What I've discussed with you is what we talk about every day for hours, and then do research and talk about it more and talk about it more and do more research. So what I'm doing to you is nothing more different than what I do next door to my colleagues, because they're always asking about. Of course, we go into a lot more detail, the scientific concepts and experiments, design, and this kind of stuff. But the overall discussions of the frameworks and things is no different than what you and I have just discussed.
Professor Seyfried, please don't retire to Florida because we need you. And thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to going back to Calcutta.
Oh, that's going to be great. Let me know next time you go. I'll recommend some food options. Maybe one day you can do a cheat day.
Yeah,
Have
maybe.
some glucose.
All right, thank you very much. A real pleasure.
Hi, everyone. If you wish to be notified of future podcast episodes and my writing on longevity and the frontiers of biology, please subscribe at livelongerworld.com. And if you're enjoying the show, please leave a rating on Apple, Spotify, or elsewhere. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.